angle and this, and you had interviews all over the place. I lost count of how many interviews you've done. And on that note, how is it we classify you nowadays? Are you simply the author of a bestseller? Are you a catwalk extraordinaire? I saw that. Are you the hip hop dancer? Are you the change management expert? Are you simply an inspirational speaker? Or are you just the gorgeous Indian gay woman and wife and, last but not least, friend? You've had an amazing start to 2021 after what ended up being quite an eventful COVID 2020 for the world. And on that, how is it that someone wakes up one morning and thinks, I think I'm going to write my coming out story, and I think I'm going to make it a really public event? How do you do it? And not even how do you do it, how do you actually start that thought? But before we get to that, because I am getting a little bit ahead of myself, what I want to know is if we take a step back, and let's focus on India for just a moment. Because the way I see it, you're a woman of two countries. India, you are predominantly the gay woman. You would have felt that quite strongly. Australia, you're the gay woman of colour. So with these statements in mind, can you talk to us around each country and its impact on you? India, the gay focus, Australia, the gay and the coloured focus. And on that, are we able to extend and have a look at the Black Lives Matters movement and that impact on you? Big questions, right?
Is that like a three-part question?
I think it was actually three-part. If I could have switched four into it, I would have.
That's all right. I'll start with the first, and if I missed the second or third, just prompt me and we'll go back to it.
We'll bring it back.
I believe the first question was about India and Australia and the differences around colour and being a gay woman. Look, I think growing up in India, you know, I never really thought of myself as a person of colour.
Yeah.
Growing up in India, that isn't something that is almost a differentiating factor, because everyone is a person of colour. It might just be a different shade, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, you know, what stood out for me more in India was around growing up as a woman and growing up being different. And what I mean by that is, you know, I was born into an Anglo-Indian community. So whilst I am Indian, I'm actually Anglo-Indian. So my, you know, great ancestors were part British and part Indian. So even though I'm Indian, I always grew up feeling slightly different or not being fully Indian.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, like growing up feeling like, you know, you needed to be more. And when I think about, you know, what it was like growing up as a woman in India, I never really fit the mold of what a traditional Indian woman or an Indian girl was meant to be. You know, I've always had short hair. It has gotten shorter over the years, but, you know, I've always had short hair, you know, and Indian women traditionally have, you know, longer hair. They're more feminine. They speak a certain way. They walk a certain way. They behave a certain way. And I never fit any of those. So I grew up always feeling different, even without knowing, you know, what the words gay necessarily meant, or even before layering on that my sexuality. There was always a difference. But, you know, the word gay was never mentioned back then. You almost could not be a person of color and be gay. You couldn't be Indian and be gay. And there was so much negativity and hostility associated with that word that it wasn't even in my vocabulary. But it was only after moving to Australia that was an avenue that I could explore. But when I moved to Australia, all of a sudden now I was a person of color. When I walked into a room, and many rooms early on, I was often the only Indian in that room, often the only person of color in that room. And then that made me realize the different intersectionalities that we go through when we're part of a minority or part of various different minorities, how that impacts us and how the focus changes depending on the circumstance and depending on the situation. But, you know, what Australia has allowed me to do is to explore my sexuality and explore who I am as an individual. And it's allowed me to grow through on that journey to get to a point now where I am comfortable in my identity. I'm comfortable being a gay woman of color, and I feel safe to be able to share this space and to be able to talk to it.
Yeah.
I think the last bit was around the Black Lives Matter movement and how
does it resonate for you? Does it, like, how do you feel around it?
Yeah, I think, you know, for anyone that has been part of a minority or grown up or experienced in any shape or form a way of discrimination, whether that's racism, whether that's, you know, due to gender or sexuality or ability, I think in some way, shape or form, we can identify to what it feels like to be discriminated against for something that you can't control. And I think, you know, there's always an element where you're walking down the street and you might look over your shoulder to think, you know, am I safe?
Yeah.
So I think in that respect, it definitely resonates. But even though I've been through the journey that I've been through, I can't say or quantify that my experiences are anyway in shape or form compared to, you know, some of the horrific stories that we hear that people have suffered, not just in the US, but in Australia too, with Aboriginal brothers and sisters. And you know, I wish that we were in a place where movements like Black Lives Matter didn't have to exist. But in saying that, I think it's really important that they do exist, because it gives people a voice, and people need to make a stance to say, like, this is no longer accepted. You know, the behavior we walk past is often the behavior we accept. And I think, you know, movements like this are so important for change to take place and for us to be able to give people the space and hear from the voices that should be heard.
Yeah, that's fabulous. It's I love that link to simply minority groups. It's fabulous. Thank you. Thanks, Nerissa. There was a part of your book, I will reference a lot of your book, of course, tonight. How can I not?
I'm holding it here in case.
In your book, that just blew me away. And it was the fact that as you were growing up, you were the only gay person you knew.
I was the only gay in the village, and I didn't even know I was the only gay in the village.
Yeah, like, and we're not talking about 50 years ago. Like, we're talking about, what, a decade ago? Like, we're not talking a long time ago. So there were no gay folk around you. I find that amazing. And for those of us who don't know, what's India like now? Are gay couples walking the streets holding hands, or is it still taboo?
Yeah, look, when I grew up there, like I said in the first question, like, there was no concept. You couldn't be Indian and gay. You know, being gay was seen as a Western concept, you know, something that was, you know, you go abroad and then you become gay, or, you know, it was a phase. But even in saying that, there was no reference material. You know, I'm talking about a time, Sarah, where, you know, it's hard to say, like, you know, I didn't have the words, but this is kind of pre-Google. Yeah. This is, you know, when dial-up internet was cool.
Yeah.
You know, without giving away too much of my age. But, you know, there was no way to look up or understand what this meant. Like, so that is kind of the time, but also the laws, you know, the laws have only very recently changed in India, where, you know, we had a section 377, which basically said that, you know, people of the same sex that were together would be criminalized. Yeah. It was illegal to be gay. You could be sent to jail, and worse still, you could be killed. Mm. And even though, you know, that wasn't, I think, prevalent in you know, the cities that I grew up in, you grew up with the fear that you didn't want to cross that line. Yes. Yeah. You know, even, you know, why would I try that when I know that that's what's going to come with it? Yeah. So, you know, you always grew up with that fear. And I think there's, you know, since I moved here and I've gone back to India, I had the opportunity of going back to India with my wife. And, you know, it was really interesting because things have changed, but there's still an element where there's, you know, someone will dig at you and go like, you know, what's that relationship? Is that your partner? Is that your friend? Like, who is it? Yes. And you still feel a certain sense of fear. Yeah. Where, you know, I didn't feel comfortable holding my wife's hand in India. Yeah. But conversations are changing. You know, even since doing the book, I think India has progressed in so many steps that I'm able to have conversations now with people back home and talk about the book and have open conversations. And I think that shows progress.
Yeah.
I think the fact that, the laws have now changed.
Yeah.
It doesn't accept same-sex marriage, but it accepts gay people and accepts LGBTQ people. And, they're talking about LGBTQ plus and about inclusion and about equity. And I think those are the conversations that need to happen.
Yeah.
But culturally and traditionally in India, there's a lot of, I suppose, enrooted cultures that speak differently to people being gay. And I think that's where the conversations need to change as well.
Yeah. No, you're spot on with that. It's interesting, growing up in conservative Adelaide, it was a little bit similar. The role models were not there. And I imagine India did not have the role models. And I always had this idea that if the role models aren't there, when I was comfortable and out and proud, I needed to be the role model for that little Sarah and for the little Neri, who would look around and think, wow, they're pretty cool. It's an okay thing to be gay. When I was growing up, Frankie on Prisoner was the only role model. And I thought, oh my goodness, I can't be this person. Like, it was hideous.
Yeah.
But like some of the role models that they portrayed on television were quite poor. So I imagine for you, particularly going back to India with your wife, would have been an amazing experience to be able to stand quite tall and be that role model for people around you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, while there comes with it an element of fear, there's also an element where I want to say, I don't want to hold back now because I feel comfortable being me, and I want to allow other people to feel that. Yeah. I totally understand that people need to feel safe wherever they are. And there's no, there's nothing like, you've got to come out and you've got to be it. But I think it really talks back to representation.
Yeah.
You said, like when I was that little 10-year-old or even that 15-year-old or 16-year-old growing up, there was no one that I could look up to that remotely resembled me. Yeah. And even if there was, they were kind of shunned so much from society that you wouldn't want to associate yourself with them. So to now be able to live openly and comfortably and authentically, I'm like, I don't want to shut up. I'll talk to anybody that wants to talk to me. Because I want to tell people how amazing and how liberating it can be. And I think, especially with India, it's really important for people to understand that I'm still just me. Yeah. Because I've come out, I'm not different. I'm still the same sister. I'm still the same daughter. I'm still the same friend. Yeah. But I'm just living more authentically as who I am now.
Yeah. And it's funny. This was actually a question I had to bring up later, but it's sort of apt now. So if we look at, if you put yourself back in that position of who you were, when you look through the book, you were cheeky. You were cheeky, you were a larrikin, you were fun. And it's funny, what you were talking around in the book was how now that you are authentically yourself, you present differently. You present with a different persona and you're probably a little bit still the larrikin, but now people are looking to you. They're looking to you for guidance, for advice. How do you manage that responsibility? Because it's a huge responsibility, particularly when you consider we're not talking about a local bestseller. We're talking about an international bestseller. Like that's a big responsibility. How do you manage that?
Yeah, I think the shift has been quite interesting to see because, you're true. I was the black sheep of the family, right? Like, so there was no hopes or expectations that I was ever going to do something, right? I failed in school, as I talk about in the book. I failed in university, failed in relationships. I was the failure. And I think, there was no one expected anything of me in that respect. And in some ways, that helped a little bit to say, well, there's no expectation. So whatever I do is going to be okay. But I think, it was also because the environment I was in set me up to fail. Yeah. Because it didn't allow me to be me. Yeah. And I think when I think about it and when I'm able to live congruently with who I am as a person, that changes how you present. That changes how you intrinsically see life and be in life. And, I've noticed, friends and family come and tell me, like, you seem so much lighter. You seem like, you're not fighting internally. And that's true. It's because I'm not. It's because I can now be me and there's no layers that I now have to hide behind.
Yeah.
But when we talk about, responsibility and, how do you do that? I think the way I approach is that I don't know all the answers.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to get it right all the time. And just because I've written a book and shared my story doesn't mean that I'm the expert on anything, really. This is just my life. And, whenever I'm asked a question, all I can do is talk from my very personal and authentic journey.
Yeah.
And if my journey and if my, whatever I have been through and grown through, if I'm able to share that and be vulnerable in sharing that, that inspires and engages people. And if that can, allow someone else to learn from my journey and find their own way of growing through life, then that's all I can ask for.
Yeah. I have a thought that when we go through trials in life, particularly deep ones like, gender and things like that, like they're quite personal and they permeate all aspects of our life. When we do that, we reach sometimes this rock bottom. There is no place but up, right? There's no place but up. And I'm just wondering, can you look back on what you experienced as you're going through your journey, and can you look at it and think, I am actually pleased that I went through it because I'm this person today? Like, are you at that point in your life? Yeah,
absolutely. Look, I think, I really wish that, people from our community sometimes didn't have to journey the journey that, often we go through. But, when I look back and when I reflect, I think every instance that I've experienced, everything in life has taught me something, and it shaped me to who I am today. Every relationship that I've had, every conversation, even things like, being bullied in school, has really taught me something in life. And you take from that learnings, and I often say, and I say this in the book, I'm now at a point where I don't look at life and ask, why is it happening to me? I look at it from a point of, what is this teaching me?
Yeah.
And when we can turn it around that way and look at life from that instance, then I think that gives us the perspective and the hope of growth.
Yeah.
But, when you talk about being in a very dark place, I have been in some very dark places before, and I've, leaned to means where I talk about in the book that, I'm not always very proud of, but, at the time it's what I could lean on to get me through. And I'm very lucky. Like I often say, and this is why I don't take life for granted, because I know my life could have been very different. My journey could have been very different, and I might not have even made it to here. So I don't take any of that for granted. But I think when we are at our lowest points, I think it's so important to never give up, never give up. And it is very hard when you're at rock bottom to look for hope, because often there isn't. But if we can just look inside and kind of just find something inside of us that tells us to keep going. And I think what's also been really important for me when I look back is the connections that I've had through my life, whether that's been through my mom and my sister, whether that's been through friends in school who, even though didn't know necessarily that I was being bullied, they were still there for me. They were my safety net, a place where I felt comfortable in. Whether that's connections through moving to Australia and building new connections here. It's always helped me that even when I'm really, really low and really down, to kind of still make the effort to keep that connection going, because I feel it makes us accountable.
Yes.
It makes us a little bit more accountable to someone else other than just ourselves. And now that I am married and I share life with my amazing wife, I always tell her, like, thank you for making me accountable, because now I am accountable for someone else, or to someone else. So I think connections are really important, and being able to reach out, to ask for help, and to gain that support is really important as well.
Yes. Thank you for that. I want to move to another part of the book, if that's okay, and it's the book that that genuinely just stopped me in my tracks. And it's the part where you finally come out to your sister. And the book reads, "My stomach was churning, my hands were shaking. I could hear my heart thumping in my chest. And your sister responds with, I accept you." And it was all you needed to hear. It encompassed everything you say. For the people that are listening today? You know, it's funny, when I was preparing, how it felt and how that was the most amazing response that someone could have ever given.
Can you hear me? It's frozen on my end, but just let me know if you can hear me.
We can hear you.
Okay, cool. So
Yeah.
I got a bit of that question where you're talking about my sister's response.
Yes.
And to talk you through that.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so, you know, as you were talking about that, Sarah, I had goosebumps just listening to you just even talk about that. And every time, you know, it's now 10 years since I came out. And every time I hear that or we talk about it, and it takes me back to that instance, I just get goosebumps because, you know, for me in that moment, it was one of the most difficult things that I had done up to date. It was one of the most, like, you know, in that moment, I had to break so many ingrained beliefs, so many ingrained limiting beliefs, so many years and generations of conditioning to be able to, in that moment, step out and say, look, this is who I am. And I really hope from the bottom of my heart that you will accept me. And when she said, I accept you, that was all that I needed to hear at that moment, because it was so amazing, because she is, you know, she has grown up in India to the same time that I have. She's younger than me, for people that don't know. So she's gone through the same kind of understanding or lack thereof that I've had to anything that's, you know, gay or related. So for her to draw on just her connection and what she felt for me in that moment, and to just be able to have the maturity and the love for me and the acceptance to say the words, I accept you, was just phenomenal. I mean, it was just all I needed to hear. And it is what set my coming out journey and my journey since then on the path that's led me to where I am today. Because had her response been something else, it would have really changed my journey. My coming out journey would be very different.
Yes. Yeah. I want to take two paths now, if that's okay. For one of them, I want to talk about if we've got people that are listening and they're not able to say to their child or their friend, I accept you, have you got a next best phrase for them to say? Something that they're struggling to say that still makes the gay person, the gay child, have some sense of it's okay.
Neri's just joining back in.
Okay.
So we might have to redo that question.
I can repeat this one.
Hello, sorry, I'm back.
That's okay.
I froze and then I disappeared, but I promise it wasn't the question.
I know the question scared you, didn't it?
It was terrifying. I've now recovered. I'm back. Let's go.
So I was talking just about the best response was your sister's, of course, I accept you. Have you got a next best for those people that are listening tonight or listen to the recordings down the track? Have you got a next best phrase that they can say if they're not able to say, I accept you? And I can't even believe I have to ask the question, because I think everyone should be able to say, I accept you. But the reality is that's not the world we live in yet. That's our utopia. We're not there yet. So a next best phrase.
Absolutely. And I think that's very true, because, you know, before I suddenly disappeared, I was actually going to say that, you know, even though my sister started with the words, I accept you, she then went on to ask me questions after that and dwell into it and get a better understanding of it. So it wasn't like, you know, she just came from a complete understanding of knowing everything that I've been through. And I think, you know, for people out there today, I'd probably say three things, right? If it's not acceptance, come at it from a place of awareness. And I talk about awareness in the sense of, you know, like, and I have to check myself sometimes as well with this, is that not to assume that I know something about someone, or assume that because I present a certain way that someone else is going to be that same way, right? To create a space where each individual feels comfortable to tell us how they want to be, to tell us how they feel comfortable, whether that's through pronouns, whether it's how they identify, whether they choose to come out or they choose not to come out. You know, I don't even think everyone needs to necessarily come out. It's a very personal journey and it's a very personal thing. But for anyone that's on the other side, to create that environment where, you know, you're not going in from a place of arrogance where it's like, this is how it should be, but you're going in from a place of genuine curiosity. And just to understand, you know, what that person is going through and allow them to tell you what is comfortable for them. And after awareness will slowly come the acceptance around, once they're able to tell you and you're able to understand, then you can open up and provide that sense of acceptance. But if you take a step back, I think what governs all of this and what comes back to even my sister's response, it was based from a place of love.
Yeah.
And I think if we can use that as the general frame of reference, just love and kindness when we're talking to someone, when we're, you know, journeying through life with anyone that might be going through, not necessarily having to come out, but anything else. It might be mental health. It might be, you know, anything that people are suffering with today, given what we're currently, you know, experiencing worldwide, is just to approach people and life with a general sense of love and kindness and allow them to guide some of that journey.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. I like that. The flip side, I want to talk about your mum for a moment. And I think your mum might be on the line as well at the moment. When you came out to your mum, this part actually still can bring make my voice crackle a little bit. You apologised to her for being gay because you felt you had to apologise. And in the book, you go on to talk about why you felt you had to apologise. I want to put that bit aside for a moment. I want to ask you, in hindsight, what words would you now use?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because, you know, I haven't, I'm done coming out. I haven't thought about re-coming out to my mom.
No, but see, you apologise, like you had a need to apologise, right?
No, I think if I had to do it again, absolutely, I wouldn't apologise. And I think, you know, my mum reassured me that day and has reassured me ever since that I have no need to apologise for who I am. But if I was to do it again and say a different word, I would probably go with, Mum, this is me. This is who I have always been. This is me. Yeah. And take it from there. And not apologize in any way, shape or form, because I now know that I have nothing to apologize for, and no one should have to apologize for who they are. There is absolutely nothing wrong with how we are. And, you know, being gay is not a choice. It's not something that we choose. And, you know, I wouldn't want it to be any other way, even if I did have a choice.
Yeah. Which you don't.
No, I don't.
I think your mum and your sister are fabulous. I truly do. And I love that part. As heart-wrenching as I found it to read, I loved reading it, and just how supportive they've been of both yourself and your wife. You talked a little bit earlier about space to be, and letting people disclose themselves and their preferred pronouns and what have you. How does someone, say a more traditional person, how does a more traditional person do this? How do they give someone space to be? Can you talk us through and maybe give our audience some tips?
Yeah, I think, you know, it comes back to what we were talking before around the whole piece around, you know, awareness, acceptance and love. And I think if we approach conversations like that, then, you know, absolutely it creates a place where people can be. But, you know, if I were to give tips, you know, I would just say that be mindful of the language that we use day to day, and ensuring that we use inclusive language. And I say this, and I'm not saying in any way that I get it right all the time. I make mistakes too. And I think the important thing is that when we do make a mistake, you know, that we acknowledge it, that we pause and we say, I'm sorry, I got it wrong, but please tell me how I can do better. Because, like the famous quote from, forget the person now, it's gone off my mind, but, it's like, when we know better, we can do better. And I think, allowing people to have that conversation with us, allows people the space to be themselves, to allow them to tell us how they identify, how they choose not to, and just be. And whether that's, in the day-to-day conversations we have with that individual, or in how we present day-to-day, how we lead our lives with our friends, with our colleagues, with our kids, even like, parents out there, the conversations that, sometimes the conversation isn't with your kid necessarily, but they're picking up on how you are talking about a friend, or how you are talking about a colleague, and they're listening. So just being very mindful of, how we are, and that understanding that there are people that identify in very, very different ways, that there's so much fluidity now. And there's no right or wrong, and everything is acceptable, and that's the way it should be.
Yeah, I like that. Do you know, when I read your book, it was quite amazing. I realized as I was reading it, I've never read a coming out story before, ever. Like, I was just astounded when it dawned on me, because I'm reading it thinking, wow, I can really relate to this. So I laughed, I cried, I related. Did you have any idea? Like, obviously something inside of you was compelled to write the story. But were you writing it for yourself, or were you writing it for the world? Because the impact and the interest in your book has been quite phenomenal. Like, did you have any idea?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And, partly no, and partly yes. And partly like absolutely no. Because when I had the idea to write the book, I wanted to write it because of what you said, in the sense that, I was never able to read someone else's coming out story, and when I came out, I did not have a point of reference, and I would have loved to have, a book that I could pick up on the shelf, or something, or someone that I could talk to, or even have a chat to, that could not necessarily tell me how, but just I could know that they were okay, that they had done what I was about to do, and they were on the other side, and they were okay.
Yeah.
So when I set out to write the book, it was very much around, if I can change one person's life, if I can change, make an impact to one parent's conversation, or if one teacher talks to their student differently, then that's what I want my book to achieve. Or for any kid growing up that feels like they're different, to know that they're not alone. And that was what I started out with, the idea to write a book. But as you go through, it is a very personal story to share. And it was hard to be able to be vulnerable at times, to share that story in the truth, and in the way that it has to be shared. But I often thought about, what it would be like to have a book like that for myself. And I did a podcast in August last year. And when that podcast went to air, the feedback that I got from that podcast was not from people that I thought I'd get it from. It wasn't from people in the community. Yes, there were a few, but it was from parents that said, I will have a different conversation with my child because you've shared your story. And it was from teachers that had taught me in school that came back and said, thank you for sharing that. And that's what told me that the book had to be written. That's what gave me, that's what solidified, I suppose, the idea to say, okay, go out and do this. But even then, as I was writing, while I wanted to share my story and share it with that one person that was going to read it, I did not know what impact it would have. And I always felt like, there's always that voice at the back of you that says, it's just your story. Who's going to want to read it?
The seed of doubt.
But I said, let's just keep doing it. Let's just get it out there. And I really wanted for it to happen last year, because I wanted the year to end with giving people a sense of hope and positivity. And the response that I've got since the book has come out has really just blown me away. The love, the feedback, the acceptance, the reviews. And I think what's resonating is the fact that it is just a story from just someone that you don't normally hear a story from. I think that's what's the fact that my story isn't different, you know, which is, you know, I share a quote often that is from Malala Yousafzai, where she says, you know, I share my story not because it's different, but because it's not.
Yes.
And I think that, you know, my story, the story for a lot of people on this call, the story for, you know, a lot of people journeying through life is not very different. We all go through what we're going through. And I think that's what's resonating with people.
Yes, yes, yes. Sorry about background noise if you can hear the little one screaming in the background.
All good. We're very accepting on this call.
We are very accepting. I thought at this stage, PJ, were there any questions from the audience that anyone would like to share? And I thought we might just throw it open and see if there are any questions.
There's nothing in the chat yet, but feel free to either unmute or drop it into the chat and we'll call it out for you.
Okay, well, we might just ask one more question just while we're waiting on the audience to think of a couple. The question, Nerissa, is do you think we'll find a time where we won't have to come out? Because straight folk, right? Straight folk don't have to come out. Do you think we will hit that time?
Oh, I'd love to say yes. I think we're all hoping for and working towards a world where people don't have to come out in whatever shape or form, right? We should all be able to just be and exist and live and coexist. But sadly, I don't think we're there yet. And I think, you know, even though I've come out and this is who I am, there are still circumstances and still instances, even today, where I still have to come out, even though I'm out. I'm like, I've got to go back in and come out again. I've done this. I've written a book. But you know, there are still instances. And, you know, for example, we moved homes about 1.5 years ago. And in moving home, we changed our GP, as you do. And it's even through a simple process like that, where you go to a doctor, where you've got to come out. And in some shape, way, or form, that becomes part of the conversation. Yeah. When you go to a new job where people don't know me, there's almost an element. And I don't go, oh, by the way, I'm gay. You know, I just drop a line in that is part of my life. But there's still a bit that you've got to come out every time. And I think that's what is so important for anyone listening, is to ensure that the language we use, to ensure that the space that we're creating is a safe place where people, you know, maybe not everyone is as comfortable as Nerissa or as Sarah to come out. And people are still struggling today with having to continuously have to come out. So, you know, where possible, creating spaces where people feel safe is so important, so that re-coming out process just becomes a little easier each time.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. PJ, I've seen a couple of things pop up.
Yeah, so a comment that says, I have to go back in then come out. And then how often are we going in our own ways? So I guess relating to going back into the closet to come out again.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think it's broader than just coming out as gay. I think often as individuals, there are parts of ourselves that we leave inside a closet or leave outside a door, or we feel uncomfortable to take into certain places because of certain reasons. You know, it's not always due to sexuality or gender. There's ability, there's mental health, there's, you know, racism. There's so many different reasons why we feel that bits of ourselves are not okay. And I talk about this at the end of the book, where you know, I talk about my framework around, I feel and I really believe that anything is possible when we're able to be ourselves, believe in ourselves, and back ourselves. Because I really feel that there's so many times when you can be yourself, but just being yourself sometimes isn't enough, and you need that inner belief to know that I can step forward and I can do this. And often in life, there are times when even the belief doesn't get us further enough, and we really have to back ourselves in situations. And sometimes, you know, the only person backing us can be ourselves. And that's why I think it's so important when we're in situations like that, that you're able to dig deep and really know that you are amazing the way you are, that you are loved the way you are, and to just be authentic, be you in whatever shape or form that is. You know, we're at a point now where differences are embraced, you know, where differences are celebrated, and we want that more and more. So, you know, being able to embrace those differences and turn them into strengths really allows us to feel comfortable in being who we are, in making mistakes, as I do often, all the time. But being able to feel comfortable in your skin to say, okay, I made a mistake, I'll learn and I'll get it right the next time, and moving forward. And I think doing more of that each day allows us to not have to go back into that closet so much, and allows us to break some of those limiting beliefs that we often have of ourselves or other people put onto us.
Yes, so true and so sad all at once. And I often wonder, you know, I think the closet we go back into, it's a skinnier closet often. It's not as deep, doesn't have as much darkness in it, because we know that light actually is outside there, which gives, I think you did right, you know, releasing the book last year gave us all a sense of hope. There was something amazing that was going to happen, and we all got to look forward to it. And then when we got to read it, it was, that's right, there is hope. There's hope. There's hope. And we find it in lots of different ways, but your story definitely was one of those ways that we were able to resonate with that. So thank you again. PJ, do we have any other questions?
I have a question.
PJ, so look out. He's been psyched up to ask this one.
Yeah. I guess my question relates to when you're talking about having connections. And you also mentioned there were some days where it was quite, I guess, dark for you. So how did you deal with those dark days that enabled you to get to a connection point? Or did someone actually come in and say, hey, you need to connect with me? Or was it you actually had to then push yourself a little bit? I guess is my question.
I suppose if I think back through, you know, the different stages of, you know, growing up and being in school, being a teenager, moving to Australia, starting work out here for the first time, you know, there's often places and instances in where they have been very dark and very alone times. And, you know, something I talk about in the book that helped me through that was being able to dance and tap into that. And I think, you know, different people have different things. Some people read, some people it's music, some people meditate, for whatever is your space where you can feel safe and be. I think for me, dancing gave me that space to just sometimes shut down from everything that was around me and just be me. And sometimes, you know, I talk about in the book as well, where I just had to turn off all the lights and just be by myself, quiet and alone, and allow myself to be in that for some time before I got the energy to then put the light back on and deal with everything else that was happening. And I think sometimes that's okay to do. I think we live in, you know, a world now, and especially now in a Zoom world where everything is on the go all the time. You know, all the senses are always up and going. And I think it's okay to give ourselves some time sometimes to just switch off and to switch out of that and to be in ourselves. But if I talk about, you know, the flip side of that is connection. And I think even in those really dark moments when I was alone in my space, I wasn't necessarily alone in a sense of not having people there for me. Because even at the time, people might not have known what I was going through. Or even if they partly knew, they probably didn't have the words to support me. But I always felt very strongly that I had a presence of friends growing up in school that would always have my back. I wasn't sure if I came out to them, how they would react. And I think that was never a concept then for me, but I knew that they would have my back. And I knew, and even to the point where I was able to come out to my sister and my mom, that was when they were in India. So for people that don't know, haven't read the book, I came out to them over the phone. They were back in India and I was here in Australia. And what allowed me to do that was the sense of connection, was the sense of knowing that I'm going to have to try and reach out to these people. And I hope that they will have me and will have my back. But it's always, I suppose, never giving up on that connection. And I'm really lucky that even though people didn't have the words to support me back then, they never gave up on me. And I think that's taught me something in life where I try very hard to now not give up on other people. Yeah. You know, to make a phone call, to check in with people, to ensure people are okay. I think, you know, if we all do our little bit in that, ensuring that we build connection and continuing to look out for each other, I think it just helps us stay connected even in times when we feel like we really can't connect.
Yeah. Wow.
Does that answer your question?
Fabulous answer.
Better than I could have imagined or said. So thank you.
Thank you, Nerissa. Does anyone else have any other questions? Oh, Claudia.
Yeah, Sarah. Nice to see you again, even though
Lovely to see you as well.
It's really, well, lovely to meet you, Nerissa, even though it's in an online situation, and it's really refreshing being here and listening to your story. I have no idea about you. I didn't have any idea about your personal story, or I haven't read the book, but as I'm listening to you, I like to know what made you, like, let's say, reunite or have this strength to come out. And also I like to know who you had the need to come out with these two questions.
So the first one was, what did I draw on to come out? And what was the second question?
Yes. How did you have the strength? What made you have this strength to talk about your real self? And then I guess, as you were talking about the friends from school, I was wondering, who was important for you to talk, to share this personal self, and why? I guess your sister, your mother, but who else and why? Yes.
Yeah, sure. So to answer the first question, I think it wasn't in a day that I decided, and it wasn't in a month. It was many months and close to a year that it took me to journey through a process of self-discovery. Because at that time, you know, I'm talking 10 years ago, I'm talking, again, it's very hard for some people on this call to realize, because you go, what do you mean you didn't know a gay person? How could you possibly not know a gay person? And sure, there might have been many gay people in my surroundings, but I never had the opportunity to connect with any of them or know their stories at a personal level, because I was too scared to even approach that question for myself. So where I was coming from was from a place of a point of no reference. And the reason I had to spend that time and take that time to really dig deep and understand me and be comfortable with me, because I had to personally get to a point where if I came out and everyone around me rejected me, I needed to know that I would be okay with me.
Yeah.
And it gets me choked even now when I think about it, but that was a very hard thing to do, because it was breaking a lot of limiting beliefs, a lot of beliefs that I had grown up with, that people had put onto me, some of their own beliefs, and generations of conditioning that got me to believe that, you know, I wasn't okay being me, that I needed to be something else, that I needed to be more, that I needed to be and fit a certain mold. And it took me a long time of self-discovery to get to a point to say, I can no longer live this life based on what other people want me to do. And I was turning 30 And that was almost like my goalpost, to say, you know, I've lived this life based on everyone else's terms and conditions for way too long, and nothing good is coming from me doing this, and I've got to break this cycle, and I've got to stand up for me. And I didn't think it would go the way it did. I'm very, very lucky that it did. I'm so blessed and so grateful that I had my sister and my mom and the family and friends around me that accepted me. But I almost in my mind created a scenario very different to what my coming out journey was going to be, because of all the ingrained negativity that was associated with this. And the reason that the bit that pushed me to do it was because I knew I could no longer live a lie anymore. So for me to continue living, I knew I had to face that fear and be me. Yeah. And if being me meant I would lose everything else, then at least I'd still be me. Yeah. And I think that's what ultimately pushed me to do it. To answer your second question, in terms of the who would I tell, it definitely came down to, it was, should I tell friends or should I tell family? And it came down to telling my mom or my sister. And the reason is because I thought that, you know, even deep down, if they didn't understand it, if they didn't get it, then I hoped that just the fact that we were family and related in some way, shape or form, that they would still stand by me and still be like, all right, we don't get it, never going to talk to you again, but we'll still be somehow related to you and meet you at Christmas. And, you know, I joke about it, but I know so sadly that is a lot of people's story, you know, so I don't take my story in any way, shape or form for granted, because I know how lucky I am to have had the coming out journey and the story that I've had. And, you know, I hope that there are more mums and sisters and friends out there that will allow people the same coming out journey that I've been blessed to have.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Nerissa. Thank you, Claudia, for great questions there. Do we have any other questions online?
I've got another one.
Oh, PJ.
Don't ask me where they're coming from, but they're coming.
God, I'm a little bit scared.
We might make this the last one because we're coming up to 8 o'clock.
All right. So you're talking in the book about being connected to, there was a group that supported you just after you came out. Not so much the group itself, but how did it feel when you found out that this group was available? Like knowing that you weren't the only one, so to speak. Absolutely.
So I think for people that haven't read the book, after I came out to my sister was in India, and even though she was so incredibly accepting of it and, you know, said all the right things, she very quickly realized that being in India, she couldn't really support me fully in the presence. And also was mature enough to understand that she probably didn't have all the answers that I needed from someone at that point. So she suggested that I go to or research anything in Sydney that could help me. And I Googled and found the women's coming out group back then, which existed in Newtown. And I got ready and got every bit of courage in me to pick up and get onto that bus and then walk down that dark alleyway and knock on that door and wait patiently for someone to open it. And I had no idea what was going to lie behind that door. But when that door opened an immense range of opportunity and possibility for me. And I walked up those stairs in fear. And I sat there in my first session, in that first group meeting, and I cried. And I said, I'm gay and I don't know what to do about it. I've got to come out to family. I've got to come out to friends. I'm alone and I don't know what to do. And the people that were there then just listened. They allowed me to be. They allowed me to cry through my fears. They allowed me to share what those fears were. And they just listened. And they provided me a space where I felt comfortable. I felt accepted. And I felt like there were more people like me in the world. And I didn't have to be alone. I didn't have to feel alone, that I didn't have to journey this path alone. And through that coming out group, I've made some of my closest friends today. Some are on the call today as well. And it was through that coming out group that I met my wife. So that changes my life. So I think, you know, talking back to connection, it's so important, I think, to allow ourselves the opportunity to make those connections, but also when we're the people that are providing those connections to people, to just allow them to be and allow them some space to direct how those connections need to be formed.
We do have one more question.
I was going to say, we do have another one snuck in there. Excellent.
So let me just go back to the top of it. So thank you for sharing your story. We have heard you say that you felt like you had to apologize to your mum. This is sometimes connected to the shame we feel for being gay when we come out. I'm interested in understanding where, as an adult, and where you are now, do you need to check yourself to manage any inherent shame that comes with being gay?
Wow,
Yeah,
great question.
Great question, yeah. So I think at the time when I did apologize, when I came out to my mom and I said, I'm gay and I'm sorry that I'm gay. I think I was apologizing for the expectations that had been put on me. And I was apologizing for what I thought were my mom's expectations. Yeah. We had never had that conversation. She had never told me I needed to be this way or, you know, for her to accept me, but it was what I thought was society's expectations of me and my mom and that relationship. And I was at that time apologizing for what I thought I wouldn't be able to give her. You know, maybe she had certain dreams of me walking down the aisle and marrying a man. You know, those kind of things, those very, you know, stereotypical things that you're taught as a kid. I was apologizing for those dreams that she might not have. I very quickly then realized that I did not have any reason to apologize. Yeah. And my mom validates this for me every single day, where she reinforces for me that the fact that I'm able to now live authentically as who I am is more of a blessing to her than me ever living a life that was not who I was. Yeah. And it might sound weird, but no, I don't feel any shame for being gay. I absolutely do not feel any shame for being who I am. I am unapologetically me. And I know that gets me into hot water a lot of times, sometimes, but today, I think I spent too long of my life being a version that wasn't me. Yeah. And it took me a very, very long time to feel comfortable to live a life that was congruent with who I am, what I believe and what I stand for. So now, no, I absolutely do not apologize. I don't think any one of us should apologize for who we are. And I live with absolutely no shame. I live with pride and I live with a lot of love and a lot of gratitude for the life that I've been given.
That's excellent. Nerissa, you have a great story to tell and to share. And personally, I'm so very grateful that you've taken the time to not only write your coming out story, but to share it so publicly. And as I said earlier, I found it quite moving to read someone's fragile account of their coming out. And for many of us, coming out, as you mentioned, it's not a once-off. We come out, we continue to come out throughout our lives. However, that very first time we do it, to the few people in our lives that count, it's powerful. And you wrote it well, and you speak it well, and because of that, we feel it well and deeply. Nerissa, on behalf of MCC Welfare Services, I want to thank you for giving us your time this evening and allowing us to get a deeper glimpse into Nerissa Trindade, who is an out gay woman of colour. Nerissa, happy Mardi Gras.
Happy Mardi Gras, and thank you all so much for this opportunity and for allowing me to share my story and this evening with you all.
It was
Appreciate
wonderful that everyone was able to join us. Thank you, PJ, for all of your work on tech and behind the scenes. Thank you to all the people that dialed in from India, from Adelaide, from wherever else you are on whatever land you are currently standing on. I'm on Darkinjung country at the moment, land. Nerissa, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Have a wonderful night, everyone. Read the book, buy the book for friends, for gifts, make wonderful gifts, and happy Mardi Gras, people. Stay safe and be out and proud.
Bye. Stay safe. Stay well.
Bye, everyone.